Welcome, beautiful Sigma ladies. Some women don't enter a man's life. They upgrade his entire operating system without touching a single button. There's a strange psychological fact most people ignore. Men fall deeper, faster, and far more silently for rare women who don't need them. And out of all female archetypes, the Sigma female is the one who triggers this phenomenon at an almost scientific level. She's not loud. She's not predictable. She's not competing for attention. In fact, she doesn't even notice the competition. She's too busy being in her own lane. And that's exactly where the chaos begins. Because when a man falls for a Sigma female, he doesn't just catch feelings. His entire emotional system goes into a quiet meltdown. He tries very hard to pretend isn't happening. He starts acting in ways that confuse him, expose him, and, let's be honest, make him look like a highly intelligent man suddenly running on trial software. It's subtle, it's intense, and sometimes it's unintentionally hilarious, like when he tries to match her calm and ends up looking like he's buffering. This isn't the typical love story. It's the psychological unraveling of men when they meet a woman whose energy doesn't chase, doesn't beg, and doesn't break. This is how men act when they're in love with a Sigma female. And trust me, it's insane. Number 1, he overcompensates with logic. Because her intuition terrifies him. When a man falls for a Sigma female, he quickly realizes that she sees through him in ways no one else can. She doesn't need explanations or proofs most people rely on. Her understanding comes from something far sharper, pure intuition. She notices patterns in his behavior, the tiny inconsistencies in his tone, the way his eyes hesitate before answering. She reads him almost effortlessly, and that can be terrifying. Most men are used to controlling the narrative around them, to managing perception and masking uncertainty with charm, confidence, or wit. With a Sigma female, all of that fails. The moment she detects the subtleties he thought were invisible, a strange panic sets in. In response, men often try to regain control through logic. They begin over-explaining themselves, layering arguments, and defending choices with reasoning that sometimes even convinces no one, including themselves. It's not about deception. It's about survival in the emotional arena she dominates effortlessly. He wants to appear rational, composed, untouchable, but her intuitive radar cuts through the facade as if it wasn't even there. What makes this behavior so compelling is that it isn't conscious. He doesn't even realize he's overcompensating. He thinks he's demonstrating intelligence or stability, but in reality, he's trying to bridge the gap between her perception and his insecurities, hoping logic can patch what her intuition instantly exposes. The fascinating part is how this dynamic transforms him. The more he notices her accuracy, the more he leans on reason, which ironically reveals more of his inner turmoil. Her insight forces him to confront the inconsistencies in his own mind, the contradictions he usually ignores, and the fears he refuses to name. Over time, this leads to a strange vulnerability, one wrapped in arguments and explanations, where he's both showing his effort and hiding his awe. Her intuition doesn't just intimidate, it reshapes him. He starts thinking more, analyzing more, questioning more, all because her presence makes him realize that raw perception can outmatch any skill, charm, or strategy he's ever relied on. The logic he clings to is never enough, and he secretly knows it. Number 2, he doesn't get jealous of other men. He gets jealous of her solitude. When a man falls for a Sigma female, his jealousy doesn't show up in the usual ways. He's not worried about other men approaching her, flirting with her, or even noticing her beauty. That's almost irrelevant. What unsettles him, The part that quietly gnaws at his mind is her solitude. He sees how effortlessly she enjoys her own company, how she can disappear into her thoughts, projects, or her own world without feeling lonely, incomplete, or needy. It's a kind of independence that's rare and powerful, and it awakens something primal in him, a fear that he could never match or contain it. Her solitude isn't emptiness. It's a universe she controls, a self-sufficient energy field that doesn't need validation from anyone, including him. He notices the way she retreats without explanation, the way she can spend hours, even days, completely unattached, and emerge serene, energized, and more herself than ever. For a man who's used to measuring worth through attention, connection, or presence, this is unnerving. He realizes that no matter what he does, he can't own her focus. He can't force her to stay nearby, to think about him, or to depend on him. This isn't a shallow jealousy. It's deep, almost existential. He envies the freedom she wields, the ability to live fully inside herself without compromise. He doesn't want her to give it up, but he resents how effortless it is for her. Every man wants to feel indispensable, but with a Sigma female, he discovers that her power lies precisely in not needing anyone. The result is a complicated mix of awe, respect, desire, and quiet insecurity. He becomes hyper-aware of his own attachments, habits, and fears, realizing that the very thing that attracts him, her independence, is the same thing he can't touch, can't control, and can barely comprehend. Loving a Sigma female doesn't trigger typical jealousy. It triggers a recognition of limits, a confrontation with freedom, and a fascination with the fact that her most intimate world is entirely her own, and that he's only allowed a glimpse. Number 3. He starts copying her boundaries without ever acknowledging it. When a man falls for a Sigma female, something subtle but powerful begins to happen. He starts mirroring her boundaries without even realizing it. At first, it's unconscious. He notices that she doesn't respond to every message instantly, that she doesn't feel the need to explain herself to anyone, that she doesn't tolerate drama or unnecessary noise. Slowly, almost instinctively, he begins to adopt similar behaviors. He stops overextending himself for people who drain him. He becomes more selective with his time, and he starts valuing his own energy the way she clearly values hers. What makes this behavior extraordinary is that it isn't taught or forced. He doesn't sit down and decide, "I will now be like her." Instead, her presence recalibrates him. Her boundaries act like a silent curriculum in self-respect and discipline. Suddenly, he feels awkward answering everyone's demands, checking his phone compulsively, or bending over backward to please others. He begins saying no more often, not to challenge her, not to impress her, but because her way of living makes his old patterns feel weak and unnecessary. There's also an intensity to it. The more he observes her independence, the more he realizes how chaotic and scattered his own approach to life has been. Her calm insistence on self-priority exposes the cracks in his routines and habits. Adopting her boundaries isn't about control, it's about survival, about keeping pace with someone who doesn't conform to ordinary expectations. Over time, this copying changes him in ways he doesn't openly admit. He becomes more decisive, more self-contained, and more deliberate with his energy. Friends might notice a shift in his demeanor. He seems quieter, less reactive, less desperate for validation. All of this stems from her influence, her silent rules, and her refusal to compromise her own life. By the time he even realizes what's happening, he's already operating on a higher level of self-discipline and awareness. Loving a Sigma female doesn't just challenge a man's heart, it challenges his habits, his limits, and his very sense of personal boundaries. Number 4, his ego switches from "I want to impress her" to "I want to become worthy of her." When a man falls for a Sigma female, The usual rules of attraction no longer apply. He can't rely on charm, humor, or traditional displays of dominance. Nothing works the way it normally would because she isn't impressed by appearances, titles, or status. At first, he might try the usual tactics, showing off, telling stories, demonstrating skills, but he quickly realizes that none of it matters. She isn't evaluating him, she's feeling him. She sees through superficial gestures and instinctively detects whether he is aligned with his own values. This realization triggers a profound shift in his ego. Instead of asking, "How can I make her like me?" he begins asking, "How can I actually become someone who deserves her?" It's a subtle but seismic change. The focus moves away from external validation and toward genuine self-improvement. He starts examining his habits, his decisions, his mindset, and the way he navigates life. Every failure, every flaw, suddenly feels more significant, not because she criticized him, but because he knows she would see it anyway. The fascinating part is that this change isn't forced or conscious at first. He doesn't wake up one day and decide to upgrade himself. Her presence acts like a mirror, reflecting not what she wants him to be, but what he truly is. Her standards aren't spoken, they are felt, and in responding to them, he becomes sharper, more disciplined, more intentional. He takes his commitments seriously, works on his weaknesses, and begins to live in ways that align with who he truly wants to be, not just to impress her. Over time, this transformation becomes addictive. He stops seeking approval from others because he's busy aligning himself with his own higher standard, inspired silently by hers. The irony is that he doesn't even need to impress her anymore. He's already earned his own respect, and that's what keeps him striving. Loving a Sigma female doesn't just change a man's behavior. It reshapes his ego, turning admiration into action, desire into self-mastery, and infatuation into a relentless drive to become truly worthy of the rare presence he cherishes. Number 5. He defends her, even when she isn't being attacked. When a man falls for a Sigma female, something unusual happens. He becomes protective in ways that don't always make sense to outsiders. It isn't about ego, jealousy, or possessiveness. It isn't about claiming her or controlling her space. Instead, it's instinctual, almost unconscious. He notices subtle slights, offhand comments, or even imagined criticisms, and feels a sharp urge to defend her. He doesn't need anyone to insult her. The moment he senses even a hint of disrespect or misunderstanding, he reacts. This defense isn't always loud or confrontational. Often it's a quiet vigilance, a readiness to intervene or clarify, even in situations that don't directly involve him. If someone misrepresents her words, underestimates her ideas, or questions her competence, he can't help himself. He corrects, explains, or challenges, sometimes with a calm precision that surprises even him. It's a strange combination of admiration and fear. He admires her strength, her self-sufficiency, her intelligence, but he also fears the world underestimating what she brings into it. What makes this behavior fascinating is that it doesn't come from obligation. She hasn't asked him to defend her, and in many cases she wouldn't want him to. But her presence triggers a protective reflex in him. He's drawn to her autonomy, her quiet power, and he senses that even the smallest disrespect could disrupt the equilibrium she has so carefully built around herself. His defense becomes a silent acknowledgement of her worth, an unspoken way of saying, "I see you, I respect you, and I won't let anyone diminish you in my presence." Over time, this protective instinct reshapes him. He becomes more attentive, more aware of subtle dynamics, more precise in his words and actions. It's not just about defending her from others. It's about honoring her space, validating her choices, and unconsciously mirroring the kind of respect she demands and commands naturally. Loving a Sigma female doesn't just change how a man loves. It changes how he observes, acts, and values the world, all through the lens of her singular presence. Number 6. He stops showing off his strength and starts showing her his weak spots. When a man falls for a Sigma female, he quickly learns that conventional displays of strength, confidence, or dominance mean very little to her. She doesn't admire flexed muscles, flashy achievements, or rehearsed charm. Instead, what fascinates her is authenticity, and that changes everything for him. He stops performing the persona he's honed to impress the world and starts revealing the parts of himself he usually keeps hidden, the insecurities, fears, mistakes, and doubts that make him feel vulnerable. This shift is subtle but profound. At first, he may try to maintain some control over how much she sees, carefully selecting which flaws to reveal. But her presence has a way of disarming him. She doesn't react with judgment, manipulation, or criticism. Her attention is calm, steady, and unshakable, which paradoxically allows him to open up in ways he hasn't with anyone else. The walls he built to protect his ego begin to crumble because he senses that vulnerability won't push her away. It might actually draw her closer, but only in the sense that she values honesty over pretense. Showing his weak spots isn't about seeking sympathy or testing her. It's a quiet, unspoken acknowledgement that he trusts her with the parts of himself no one else sees. His vulnerabilities become his way of communicating depth, character, and willingness to evolve. Every flaw, every hesitation he exposes is an unintentional confession. I am not perfect, but I am willing to be seen fully. Over time, this transparency changes the dynamic between them. He becomes less performative, less anxious about appearing strong, and more focused on being real. He discovers that strength isn't measured by how well he can hide flaws, but by how comfortably he can exist with them in front of someone who doesn't need him to perform. Loving a Sigma female doesn't just transform a man's behavior, it transforms the way he perceives himself, showing him that true connection is born not from dominance or bravado, but from the courage to be undeniably human. Number 7. He reads her mood. Without needing explanations. When a man falls for a Sigma female, he develops an almost uncanny ability to understand her without words. She doesn't announce how she feels or explain her moods. She simply exists in a way that communicates volumes. At first, he might think he's imagining it, attributing meaning where there is none. But over time, he realizes that every subtle shift, slight tension in her jaw, the way her eyes linger on something distant, the rhythm of her breathing, is a message he can decode. He doesn't need her to say she's upset, annoyed, or overwhelmed. He just knows. This ability doesn't come from training or effort. It emerges because he pays attention in a way he never did before. He notices what most people miss: micro-expressions, pauses, the slightest shifts in tone or energy. Her presence sharpens him, forcing him to become a more attentive, perceptive version of himself. It's not about control or manipulation. He doesn't analyze to predict or fix her. He reads her because he respects her emotional space and instinctively wants to be aligned with it. Her moods become a language, and he becomes fluent without formal lessons. What makes this extraordinary is the quiet tension it creates. He carries the awareness constantly, even when they are apart. He senses when she might need space before she realizes it herself. He feels the undercurrent of her thoughts, her stress or her calm before anyone else can even detect it. This heightened perception changes him too. He becomes more patient, more careful with his words, and more intentional with his actions. He learns to move in her rhythm rather than imposing his own. The effect is subtle but profound. He doesn't need explanations, reassurance, or dramatic confessions from her. Her energy speaks, and he has become the only person who truly understands it. Loving a Sigma female transforms him into someone who observes, listens, and feels at a level few ever reach. His connection with her is built not on dialogue alone, but on an almost telepathic attunement that makes ordinary relationships feel shallow by comparison. Number 8. He starts guarding her time more than his own. When a man falls for a Sigma female, he begins to treat her time with a kind of reverence that surprises even him. It's not about control, jealousy, or possessiveness. He doesn't try to dictate her schedule or limit her freedom. Instead, he becomes acutely aware of the value of her energy, her focus, and her solitude. He notices how deliberate she is with her choices, how carefully she protects her attention from distractions, and how she refuses to squander it on trivial matters. This awareness sparks a protective instinct in him. He starts prioritizing her presence over anything else, not because he wants to monopolize her, but because he recognizes the rarity of her attention and the precision with which she gives it. If someone is wasting her time, being disrespectful or drawing her into unnecessary conflict, he feels compelled to step in or intervene. It's a quiet vigilance. He doesn't announce it, he doesn't make a show of it, but he monitors situations around her with a heightened sense of awareness. Every invitation, request, or demand directed at her passes through his subconscious filter because he instinctively measures the impact it might have on her energy. This shift isn't something he consciously decides to do. It emerges naturally from the depth of his care. He begins to align his own schedule, habits, and actions with hers, ensuring that when he's present, he adds value rather than distraction. He becomes deliberate in how he communicates, where he goes, and how he spends time with her. He values her priorities as much as his own, sometimes even more. Over time, this instinct shapes him in profound ways. He becomes more organized, more disciplined, and more respectful of boundaries, not just hers, but his own as well. Loving a Sigma female doesn't just alter how a man spends his time, it reshapes his perception of value itself. Her time becomes sacred in his eyes, a resource worth protecting, understanding, and honoring. In doing so, he doesn't just show care, he evolves, learning to navigate life with a precision and attentiveness few ever achieve. Number 9. He talks less but means more. When a man falls for a Sigma female, he quickly realizes that empty words, jokes, or casual chatter won't earn her attention or respect. She isn't impressed by clever lines, long stories, or attempts to fill silence with noise. Over time, he begins to strip away the fluff from his communication. Every word he speaks starts carrying weight, intention, and precision. Silence stops being uncomfortable and becomes a tool. His words no longer exist to entertain or impress, but to convey exactly what he means. This transformation isn't forced. It grows naturally from her presence. She doesn't demand brevity or clarity, but her energy encourages it. Around her, rambling, over-explaining, or performing socially feels almost embarrassing. He notices that she responds not to the quantity of what he says, but to the quality, the intent behind it, and the authenticity in his tone. Gradually, he becomes deliberate, thoughtful, and strategic with his voice. Each phrase is chosen, each statement intentional, because he understands that meaningless words are wasted energy, and she values energy like currency. What makes this behavior extraordinary is how it changes his presence. He no longer feels the need to compete for attention or dominate conversations. He listens more than he speaks, but when he does speak, his words resonate. They convey honesty, insight, and sometimes vulnerability in a way that commands subtle but undeniable respect. Others might not even notice, but the Sigma female does, and that's all that matters. Over time, this habit reshapes him beyond the relationship. He becomes more aware of how he communicates with everyone, friends, colleagues, family, but the change starts with her. Silence becomes powerful, words become precise, and his voice becomes a tool rather than a performance. Loving a Sigma female transforms a man's speech into something rare, concise, meaningful, and unshakably authentic. He learns that sometimes saying less doesn't mean giving less. It means giving more of what truly matters, and in her presence, that lesson becomes absolute. Number 10. He becomes uncomfortably honest. When a man falls for a Sigma female, the usual filters, excuses, and half-truths that protect his ego start to crumble. He finds himself telling truths he would normally hide, confessions that make him feel exposed, vulnerable, even slightly foolish. It isn't calculated or performative. It's an instinctive response to her presence. He realizes that she doesn't need explanations, embellishments, or polished versions of reality. She perceives the truth naturally, and any attempt to hide or manipulate it feels absurd. This honesty can be startling, even to him. He admits mistakes he normally would gloss over, acknowledges weaknesses he usually keeps buried, and speaks feelings he would typically rationalize away. The words often come awkwardly, sometimes fumbling, but their rawness carries a weight he has never experienced before. Around her, lying or pretending becomes unnecessary because he senses she would see through it anyway. The act of hiding feels almost insulting, not to her, but to himself. Her presence amplifies this honesty, making it unavoidable. He starts addressing uncomfortable topics, confronting his own fears and contradictions, and articulating thoughts he might have ignored in any other relationship. It isn't about seeking approval, nor is it a tool to gain her favor. It's a response to the reality she embodies, someone who values authenticity above all else. The more he interacts with her, the more he feels compelled to align his words with his true thoughts and emotions. Over time, this uncomfortably honest behavior reshapes him entirely. It sharpens his self-awareness, strengthens his integrity, and deepens the connection between them. He begins to value transparency in every aspect of life, not just in the relationship. Loving a Sigma female doesn't just challenge a man emotionally, it strips him down to his core, forcing him to confront his own truths and embrace them fully. The discomfort of honesty becomes a catalyst for growth, proving that real connection isn't built on charm or performance. It's built on the courage to be undeniably, painfully, and utterly truthful. Number 11. His attention narrows. When a man falls for a Sigma female, his attention sharpens in ways he hasn't experienced before. It's not about infatuation or distraction. It's a complete reorientation of his focus. In a room full of people, amidst noise and chaos, he notices her. Not just her presence, but the subtle shifts in her energy, the way she moves, the unspoken messages in her silence. Other people, other events, even pressing responsibilities begin to fade into the background. His internal compass points almost exclusively toward her, not out of obsession, but because her presence activates a kind of clarity he never knew he had. This narrowed attention is fascinating because it transforms him internally. He begins filtering everything through the lens of her energy. Conversations, decisions, and even mundane daily choices start being influenced by his awareness of her perspective and presence. It's not conscious manipulation, it's a subtle attunement. He becomes more deliberate with his actions, more measured with his words, and more conscious of how his behavior intersects with hers. The world doesn't stop existing for him, but it loses the urgency it once had. The Sigma female creates a gravitational pull that organizes his perception, forcing him to prioritize what truly matters and discard what doesn't. The intensity of this focus can be disorienting for him. He finds himself thinking about her in ways he never considered. How she perceives the world, how she navigates challenges, and how she maintains her independence without compromise. He becomes hyper-aware of moments when he might disrupt her equilibrium or fail to align with the subtle rhythms she operates on. It's not about controlling her, it's about syncing, adapting, and being present in the rarest, most intentional sense. Over time, this narrowing of attention reshapes him profoundly. He becomes more observant, more patient, and more attuned to nuance, not just with her, but in life overall. Loving a Sigma female doesn't just redirect a man's focus, it recalibrates it entirely, teaching him that true presence isn't scattered or performative. It's selective, intentional, and profoundly transformative. Number 12. He tries to decode her independence. When a man falls for a Sigma female, he becomes obsessed, not in a possessive way, but in a quietly analytical one, with understanding how she functions so effortlessly on her own. Her independence isn't loud or performative, it's seamless, integrated into every choice she makes, every boundary she sets, and every space she occupies. He watches how she navigates the world without relying on approval, how she can walk into any situation calmly, untouched by chaos or expectation. And he wants to understand it, not to control it, not to change it, but because it fascinates him on a level he's never experienced before. He starts noticing patterns in her behavior that others overlook. The way she plans her time, the way she speaks only when necessary, the way she withdraws without drama when she needs space. Every decision she makes independently seems purposeful, intentional, and impossible to disrupt. He tries to decode it like a puzzle, dissecting moments and micro-behaviors in an attempt to understand the rules of her autonomy. The challenge isn't about manipulation, it's about comprehension. He wants to be close, but he realizes that closeness cannot come at the expense of her freedom. This process is both humbling and transformative. As he studies her independence, he becomes aware of how much he relies on external validation, how often he seeks permission or approval, and how deeply social norms have shaped his thinking. Her example forces him to confront the ways he's tethered to expectations, relationships, and habits that don't serve him. He begins experimenting with his own autonomy, testing boundaries, prioritizing self-sufficiency, and finding comfort in his own presence. Loving a Sigma female doesn't just inspire admiration, it triggers an internal awakening. He learns that independence isn't isolation, and strength isn't dominance. He realizes that someone can be fully themselves, unbothered and unchained, and still form meaningful connections. In trying to decode her independence, he unintentionally decodes himself, evolving into a man who values autonomy, clarity, and intention as much as he values the rare presence of the woman who showed him how it can exist. Conclusion. Falling for a Sigma female isn't a typical love story. It's a silent transformation, a mental and emotional recalibration that strips a man of illusions, ego, and superficial confidence. Every interaction challenges him, every glance and gesture exposes his flaws, and every moment demands authenticity. Loving her doesn't just influence behavior, it reshapes priorities, sharpens perception, and forces a man to confront the parts of himself he spent a lifetime hiding. He becomes more attentive, more deliberate, and more aware, not just of her, but of the world around him. The men who fall for Sigma females are not merely captivated, they are transformed. Their attention narrows, their communication sharpens, and their vulnerability becomes a strength rather than a liability. They stop performing, stop chasing validation, and stop pretending to be someone they're not. Instead, they evolve quietly, adopting boundaries, mastering patience, and learning to respect the sacredness of her independence. In this process, they discover something profound, that love, in its most potent form, isn't about possession, control, or constant affirmation. It's about alignment, awareness, and the courage to become better, not for anyone else, but for the rare presence that inspires it. A Sigma female doesn't just influence a man's heart. She rewires his mind, challenges his ego, and elevates his life in ways he never anticipated. And for those willing to rise to the challenge, the result is extraordinary. A connection that is rare, intense, and transformative on a level most people will never experience. If you found this deep dive into the way men act when they're in love with a Sigma female insightful, powerful, or even a little mind-blowing, make sure you hit that subscribe button to stay updated on more extraordinary content. Drop a comment sharing your thoughts or experiences, and don't forget to like and share this video with anyone who needs to understand the magnetic, unsettling, and transformative power of a Sigma female. Stay tuned, because the next revelation could completely change the way you see relationships.